Everyone told you it was a waste of time. They were measuring the wrong thing. Consider this profile. You are the system analyst. You do not walk into a problem and panic. You observe it. You test its edges. You identify which variables are fixed and which ones you can move. You have done this your entire life. In jobs, in relationships, in every situation that presented itself as unsolvable to the people around you. You stayed calm when others escalated. You iterated when others quit. You held the complexity without collapsing under it. And nobody, not one teacher, not one employer, not one person who watched you work, ever traced that ability back to where it was actually built. The room, the screen, the brightness turned down so nobody would see the light under the door. The data suggests your most important cognitive development did not happen in a classroom. It happened in a game. And the mechanism behind that is not metaphor. It is neuroscience. It is measurable. It is real. The question is not whether gaming built something in your brain. The question is whether you have ever been told what it actually built. Stay with this, because what follows changes how you read your entire professional and psychological history. Hidden mechanics. To understand what gaming constructed inside the system analyst's brain, you first need to understand the foundational operating principle of all human cognition. Your brain is a prediction engine. This is not a philosophical statement. It is the established scientific consensus on how the human nervous system processes reality. At every waking moment, your brain is generating probabilistic models of what is about to happen, comparing those models against incoming sensory data, and updating its predictions in real time. This process runs continuously, automatically, and at extraordinary metabolic cost. The critical variable is uncertainty. The higher the environmental uncertainty, the more unknowns your brain is tracking, the more expensive prediction work becomes. An unfamiliar environment is cognitively expensive. A familiar environment allows a prediction system to operate at lower cost, freeing up processing capacity for higher-order functions. This is the foundational mechanism. Hold it. Now, consider what happens neurologically when the system analyst's brain encounters a video game. A well-designed game presents a closed system of rules. It has a current state, a desired state, and a defined set of variables that can be manipulated to close the gap between them. The constraints are fixed. The feedback is immediate. The relationship between input and outcome is direct, honest, and consistent. To a brain built for prediction and pattern recognition, a game is not entertainment in conventional sense. It is a structured training environment for the brain's most expensive operating system. Each failure event triggers a dopamine response, not at the moment of success. Research on reward circuitry consistently shows dopamine releases during the anticipation and approach phases, not at goal completion. Every time the system analyst died on a level and tried again, the brain's reward system was reinforcing the exact behavior the brain was designed to favor: continued engagement with an unsolved problem. This is long-term potentiation operating at scale. Each repetition of the attempt, fail, adjust, retry cycle strengthened the specific neural pathways associated with that cognitive process, not the game-specific pathways, the metacognitive pathways, the architecture underneath the content, the skill of learning how to learn from structured failure. The psychological literature documents this as a distinct cognitive profile. Individuals who demonstrate high comfort with ambiguity, who can maintain engaged attention on an unsolved problem without triggering threat responses, consistently outperform their peers in creative problem-solving, adaptive reasoning, and novel challenge navigation. Gaming is one of the few environments that systematically develops this profile across thousands of hours of practice. The second mechanism running beneath the surface is what neuroscientists call a default mode network, a set of interconnected brain regions that activate specifically during undirected mental states. The default mode network is responsible for memory consolidation, self-referential processing, and the nonlinear associative thinking that produces genuine insight rather than analytical output. The game occupied the system analyst's conscious tracking processes, the known system, the map terrain, the familiar challenge structure. These allow the default mode network to run in parallel. The game was not the point. The game was the vehicle that occupied the surface of the mind, while the deeper processing ran underneath. The hours looked passive from the doorway. The data says otherwise. Spatial reasoning. Pattern recognition under dynamic conditions. Attentional control. The selective focus on relevant signal within complex, high-noise environments. These are the measurable cognitive outputs of sustained gaming engagement confirmed across multiple independent research programs. They are the foundation of engineering, design, emergency medicine, financial analysis, strategic operations. The system analysts built all of them in a room, at a screen, before they had the vocabulary to name what they were doing. Here is where the common assumption breaks. The conventional narrative positions gaming as a compensatory behavior. The argument runs as follows. Individuals who struggle with social integration, academic performance, or external achievement turn to games as an escape. The gaming was a symptom of difficulty. The competence built inside, it was a consolation prize for failures in the real world. The data does not support this reading. Consider the generational window. If the system analyst was born roughly between 1978 and 1990, they grew up gaming during a period when every external system designed to provide competence feedback was simultaneously failing to deliver it. The career architecture that previous generations walked, loyalty, predictable advancement, institutional security, began dissolving at the precise moment this cohort entered the workforce. The housing market that was supposed to form a stable foundation of adult life either priced itself beyond reach or collapsed into negative equity, depending on the exact timing of entry. The economic structures that were supposed to validate effort with proportional reward were not functioning. The real world was removing its feedback loops. A developing brain requires the experience of effort producing outcome. It requires a specific neurological signal of competence building through sustained work. Without that signal, without the reliable translation of input into visible, measurable progress, the developmental architecture that is supposed to form in young adulthood does not form correctly. The system analyst brain was not gaming instead of developing. It was gaming because gaming was the only available environment in which development was possible. The game was not the escape from the real world. The game was the replacement for the feedback systems the real world had stopped providing. The parents who worried were not wrong to be concerned. They were misidentifying the source of the problem. The problem was not the game absorbing time that should have been spent on productive development. The problem was that the game was performing the function that productive development is supposed to perform, and the fact that a commercial entertainment product was doing the job that economic and educational institutions had abandoned should have raised very different questions than the ones it raised. The cost, and there's a genuine psychological cost, was not the hours spent gaming. The cost was the invisibility of what those hours built. The system analyst developed a world-class problem architecture, an advanced tolerance for productive failure, and a pattern recognition capability that took researchers years to formally document. They developed all of this without external validation, without institutional acknowledgement, without a credential that named what had been constructed. They entered professional environments where the skills they possessed were either undervalued or actively misread. Patience in the face of ambiguity reads as passivity to a manager who expects urgency. The iterative approach, test, fail, adjust, retry, reads as indecisiveness to a culture that rewards the appearance of certainty. The deep system thinking that produces insight rather than immediate output reads as slow to people who measure performance by speed of response. The system analysts spent years translating a language nobody around them had been trained to read. That is the cost nobody discusses, not the gaming itself. The permanent gap between what was built and what the surrounding world was equipped to recognize. Here is what the evidence actually supports. The hours were not wasted. The psychological literature is unambiguous on this point. The specific cognitive profile produced by sustained gaming engagement, the iterative problem approach, the failure tolerance, the pattern recognition, the attentional control, these are not niche skills. They are foundational competencies for operating effectively in complex, ambiguous, rapidly changing environments, which is a precise description of the world that system analyst brain has been navigating since the feedback loops broke. The organizations that understood this earliest, in technology and design, in strategic consulting, hired people who grew up gaming not despite their gaming history, but because of the cognitive signatures that history produced. The research on creative problem solving in professional contexts consistently finds that the individuals who perform best in high ambiguity, novel challenge situations are not the ones who excelled in structured academic environments. They are the ones who spent thousands of hours in systems that rewarded patient, iterative, data-driven engagement with difficult problems. The system analyst was training for the correct environment. The institutional validation simply arrived late. And what the system analyst brain built in that room, in the quiet, in the dark, with the brightness turned down so nobody saw the light on the door, was not a collection of game-specific reflexes. It was a general-purpose architecture for operating intelligently inside systems that most people find overwhelming. That is not a consolation prize. That is a competitive advantage. One that was built under conditions of zero external recognition, by a brain that identified what it needed and went to find it when the standard sources of that need had failed to deliver. The brain knew. It always does. And the generation that built this architecture in silence is now arriving at a different kind of reckoning. The same economic systems that removed the feedback loops during their developmental years are now presenting a new challenge, one that the system analyst brain is, ironically, precisely equipped to analyze. The generation that did everything correctly, that worked the hours, navigated the disruptions, built the competencies, survived the sequential economic shocks, and still cannot retire. That profile, that psychological cost, that specific collision between a brain built for intelligent adaptation and an economic system that has moved the finish line one final time. That is what comes next. Subscribe. The next video goes there directly.